That is your Horn Headlines.
All right, thank you, Patrick, for the Horn Headlines. Let's get to one of those headlines, the Mike Tomlin deal. A lot of Pittsburgh Steelers fans, actually, it's crazy. Pittsburgh Steelers fans are split. This is how you know we're in a new era of football fan. I got to go look. I mean, how would I know? I guess I got to go read old newspapers or something to find out how Pittsburgh Steelers fans were feeling toward the end of, like, Chuck Noll's tenure, and how, how it ended, and how many games he was winning. What Pittsburgh Steelers fans, and I know it's tough because they're in the bubble. I mean, that division, first of all, is brutal. That the Steelers play. I mean, that AFC North is brutal. They won 10 games last year.
Yeah.
And still at the bottom of that division. Like, that's how good that damn division. And by the way, that was with Joe Burrow hurt. Don't forget. So when Joe Burrow gets, you can still win 10 games and be last in that damn division. Like, that's how tough the division is. That's number one. But yeah, I mean, I think if you start looking at it, ultimately, I think we always talk about the microwave society, how people want instant gratification. I do think fans now are less patient than they were toward the end of, like, Bill Cowher's tenure there at the Steelers, 3 head coaches in 55 years. So now there are probably more Steelers fans that are clamoring for a change with Mike Tomlin. There's no doubt he's underappreciated by Steelers fans, but Mike Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game in the last, maybe 7 seasons, I believe it is now.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Or at least it hasn't been to the playoffs or hasn't won a playoff game. And if you go look at it, he'll ultimately, he's getting his 8th season. He's going to get the 3-year extension here. And I got this stat too. If you look at it, only 3 other teams have done in the Super Bowl era with a coach, in the Super Bowl era with a coach who has gone this long without a playoff win. Don Shula, who went 8 seasons from 74 to 81. Jim Mora, 0-4 in the playoffs in 11 seasons. And Marvin Lewis, 0-7 in the playoffs in the last 16 seasons. So it doesn't happen a lot. But these are the Steelers, and they don't operate like everybody else. And Mike Tomlin's already got 2 Super Bowls on his resume, and he's got a Super Bowl win. Now, it's been a while since he won that Super Bowl. And I think that if you look at it, let's look at the longest gap between coaches, winning their first Super Bowls. I mean, from their first and their second Super Bowls, Tom Landry is at 6 seasons. The longest gap between coaches winning their first and their second Super Bowl. Joe Gibbs was at 5. Seifert was at 5. Tom Coughlin was at 4. Bill Parcells was at 4. So Mike Tomlin is going to win his second Super Bowl. It'll be the longest gap between a first Super Bowl win for a head coach and their second Super Bowl win.
Yeah.
It's just so. But he hasn't had a losing season yet. He hasn't had a losing season
which is
since he's
insane.
been with the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's no doubt he is one hell of a coach. And I'll say this, like I said, and I've said this for a long time too. It's almost impossible to do what the Steelers have done. The 3 in a row thing, to have 3 Hall of Fame coaches in a row. So they definitely know what they're doing. And if you go look at from the inception of the Steelers, you can see how they ended up with this model. The 35 years prior to them hiring Chuck Noll in 1969. And then Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, and of course, Mike Tomlin, 3 head coaches in 55 years. The Steelers had 16 coaches in 35 years. They went through a period with 6 from the inception of the Steelers to Chuck Noll in 1969. They had 16 coaches in 35 years. They had 1 that eclipsed 4 years, and 2 they had longer than 3 years. They just were going after coach after coach. And somewhere in there, the Rooney family said, all right, we got to stop it. Let's just figure out who we want our coach to be, pick that culture, and let's invest in it, commit to it, dedicate ourselves to it. And then they had so much success because it was Chuck Noll. And 4 Super Bowls, and they decided, all right, you know what? Because of that, let's stick with this model. And you could argue, even though Bill Cowher had a lot of success, he didn't win as many Super Bowls as Chuck Noll. And Mike Tomlin early on had way more success than almost any young coach, getting into 2 Super Bowls and winning one of them. I think the expectation was, oh, there'll be more in this future. and we'll get to why that is not the case. But that's why the Steelers got to this model, and it very much reminds me of Texas baseball. It very much is like Texas baseball. 1968. That's from 1968 to 2024. Texas baseball, 3 head coaches in that time span. Like, that's really, really impressive. A lot of Texas baseball fans believe that also it's going to change. Could change this year. Because of the standard at Texas. Now, that's what Pittsburgh Steelers are upset about. Steelers fans, they're upset that right now Mike Tomlin is not coaching to the standard of what they believe Steelers football is about. That standard is playoffs and playoff wins and postseason wins and competing for championships. And right now, that the standard seems to have dropped to, well, just don't have a losing record. And is that the Steelers standard? And Texas baseball fans are saying the same thing. Is good the standard of Texas baseball when Texas baseball as a blue blood has always had the standard of great and championships? And it's very, to me, the organization and the program very much find themselves in a very similar place. Because these are good coach, and I mean, it's no doubt Tomlin's a good, and you could argue, my argument would be that Tomlin's message has just gotten stale there. I would love for Tomlin to go to another team, and I think he'd be amazing. I think you team up with a young, dynamic quarterback, he'd be great. And who knows, him and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, that may end up working out great. That may be, a fantastic combination. I'm not sure it is, but the Steelers organization, they are savvy as hell for being able to get themselves 2 quarterback options, 1 veteran option, 1 high-level upside young quarterback possibility, and both of those guys get them for pennies on the dollar, right? So very cheap. But my argument would be that if Tomlin went somewhere else, that his message would resonate a little bit more. He's just been there a really, really long time, and when you're there that long, it's really, in my opinion, in sports, and there are exceptions to the rule, of course, but it's really tough for your message to remain fresh and still have the same impact on the organization and on the team. And you could argue even yourself, you probably become a little bit stale because you've been around there so long too. I think he needs a new, and I'm not saying they need to fire him, but I would love to see a trade. Honestly, I'd love to see a head coach trade with Mike Tomlin. And Steelers to get themselves somebody new too, because they also need, I think both sides do need to move on, because I don't know if they're going to get out of this funk, Patrick, of, hey, long as we're not under 500, that's the new Steelers standard. And that shouldn't be the Steelers standard. Just like Texas baseball, good should not be their standard. Good is the enemy of great in terms of Texas baseball fans.
I would, but I'll put it in this way. If he goes somewhere, then they have an offense and they have a quarterback. But in today's NFL, you got to have a quarterback. They haven't had one since Ben Roethlisberger. So you can say all you want, but it's unless you want to tank for 2 years and get a quarterback, then you can do that. But other than that, the biggest problem he has is that he's not bad enough to get a top pick at quarterback. So they settled on Kenny Pickett, and Kenny Pickett wasn't the dude. And you could say maybe he was Matt Canada was part of the problem at the OC, and that he was too stubborn with Matt Canada. That was a problem that was bigger for me, was that he was too stubborn of I don't want to change up our system, and it was just everyone could tell you that it was a terrible system. But at this point, I don't know if that's the problem is necessarily Mike Tomlin's message so much as it is they just don't have an offense, because they, first of all, had a really bad OC, and second, they had a quarterback. They've had quarterbacks that can't do it. Now you have 2 quarterbacks that have potential, but we don't know if they're going to be there. So it's a good trial there. But I think that there is a point where it wears out. This generation and this style, and I don't mean this generation of kids because it's everybody now, but the way people think about things now is we need to get rid of you and we don't care about the next one. Whatever happens next, but we're not worried about the replacement until we just need to get rid of you first. And I think the difference with what the Longhorns are going through right now is every Longhorn feels there's a better answer out there at least. And they say, well, we can go hire this guy from LSU, or we'll go get Schlossnagle from A&M. We'll go get a big name at Texas, and then that'll be okay. And I think CDC understands I want to make sure that other name's coming before I get rid of David Pierce. And maybe for the Steelers, it's the same thing, that they're waiting to find the right guy to replace it, that they don't want to bring somebody in unless they're sure that they think that's going to be the next guy. And the extension is, well, if we want him, we'll trade him at some point and then we'll bring in our next guy, but we shouldn't let him walk because then we lose all of our hand in this. We don't have any ability. So if we
Steelers don't fire coaches either, that's not really what they do.
No.
The coaches retire. And I think that's kind of, so it's kind of the Steeler way.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that's going to lead ultimately to Tomlin staying there until he, as a coach, kind of fades away and fades into the background, and then they decide to move on. And then, like you said, the organization, it's great not to be a team that has a losing record. It is great, but there are certain mechanisms in place in the NFL that will help teams.
Yes.
Right. If you are bad, they'll help you get a high draft pick so you can get a quarterback, as you mentioned. And they're never in that conversation either. So they're trying to acquire a quarterback either late in the first round, or they're trying to get one, like I said, via trade or free agency, like they've done. That is also a huge part of their problem. And that it is on Mike Tomlin that he's stuck with Matt Canada too long. All those things are true, but I'm talking about on the macro level, because the guy's still winning games. Like I said, he won 10 games last year. Like, he's not a terrible guy. He won 10 games with Kenny Pickett playing quarterback for him, guys. So he can coach. Like, there's no doubt about it. But he is a delegator, so he's not calling plays anymore. He's a culture coach.
Yeah.
He's about a certain culture there. And that's why I think ultimately, like I said, I think it's grown stale, because his whatever the message, and he's a great coach, it is not necessarily helping the team win games. He doesn't have a field general and quarterback, so that could be it too. But you're asking a culture coach to now lose basically and tank, and he ain't gonna do that. Like, and the Pittsburgh Steelers don't do that.
Okay, let me ask you
You're
this.
asking organizations that don't do it, they don't tank and he don't tank.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how he's gonna do what Lovie Smith did ultimately, and go try to win games regardless of the situation, because he's a culture coach.
Yes.
So he's gonna win games, and that organization doesn't operate that way. The Steelers don't tank.
No. So
they don't. If they're a tanking organization, they'd have done it by now. So my point is, we are at this point where they're not tanking, and he's not gonna have a losing record. All right, so he's not gonna be a terrible coach and be a team that has a top 5 to top 8 pick.
No.
It's not gonna happen. So, because we're at this stalemate, and they're playing in a division which is brutal. Some of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL, some of the highest paid young quarterbacks in the NFL. I just think we're at a point now where I don't know if the Steelers are gonna. There's upward mobility for them in the division. They're not tanking, and he's gonna win. He's gonna win at least 9 to 10 games every year and keep you right there in the middle class of the NFL. And what Steelers fans are saying is, we're tired of being in the middle class. We're not used to that.
No,
we're an upper class NFL organization, and right now we're just kind of stuck in the middle class. And there is no, unless one of these quarterbacks work out, and it could, there is no light at the end of that tunnel for upward mobility.
Okay, what about
they're stuck?
What about?
But you're right, for baseball fans, you're right. It's different for Texas baseball fans,
Yes.
even though they operate the same way. They see light at the end of the tunnel. They're like, hey, make the move, so we can celebrate. So I'm not saying they're in the same place in that sense in terms of moving forward, but I am saying in terms of the way they operate, the methods are the same. The belief Texas baseball is, we don't just fire coaches. We don't. Texas football does.
Yes.
Texas football will fire you quick. Right? That's the way Texas football operates, but not Texas baseball. Texas baseball doesn't operate that way. They operate more like the Steelers do, and that's why I kind of obviously made that connection today. And I do think there are differences in terms of the future optimism for the program as opposed to the organization. The Steelers.
All right, let me ask you this. The Steelers go through this season. Neither of the quarterbacks really work out. They have another middling season. They have that super tough end of season with all these divisional opponents and everything. They still have that. They have the 3 games in 10-day stretch as well, like the Texans do. So they get through this season. Dak Prescott not retained by the Cowboys. They go get Dak Prescott. You add him in and you say, what's the problem with the Cowboys? Is a culture problem. He goes to a place that has culture. Is that a way that Tomlin all of a sudden, where you are for the Steelers, you can turn this around much quicker, that you can go get a quarterback and put him in who Dak's a culture guy, Tomlin's a culture guy. You put them together. Is that a thing that's a light? If we talk about lights at the end of the tunnel, is that something that could be a possible light for Steelers fans? I know they probably don't want to hear the middling quarterback, but
it's a small, because I don't know if Dak's gonna reach free agency, but if he does and they get him, you're right. That'd be a to me, it'd be a possible run at another title for Tomlin. because I think Tomlin could help Dak get over the hump.
Yeah.
Dak right now he's playing at a high level, but he's not able to uplift the play of everybody around him and put the cape on in the postseason. I think Tomlin can help him with that, and I think he can help really kind of revive Tomlin's coaching message too, and put like a new spin on it, more modern spin on it because of Dak. That's dude, I never thought about that. Ooh.
I mean, if we're talking about teams that could be in the Dak Prescott sweepstakes if the Cowboys don't re-sign him.
Wow. That's big. That's good. I like that. I love that. That's even better than the Cowboys fans should root for Texans take, which was also a great take.
I know, but I'm just saying when we talk about lights at the end of the tunnel, I don't think it's necessarily entirely doom and gloom for the Steelers and Mike Tomlin. And I know you're not saying it because you're saying they're just going to be a 10-win team or 9-win team, and that's you don't want to be there.
But that's for them. That is doom and gloom.
Yeah,
like, they're like, this sucks. We're a championship.
Feels like Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
We want to be out of Pittsburgh. We want to be champions. I get it. No, I get it. And but I think if you find the right piece, and they're trying to find it piecemeal with Russell Wilson, who we know hasn't been the same player, and they say, well, he had culture in Seattle and it worked well enough. And we're going to take Justin Fields, and he's coming from a bad situation, but he had culture at Ohio State and it worked there. So maybe we'll get these guys that if we add that to it, we can make it work and put it together, and maybe it'll work. But if it doesn't, you don't have long-term commitments to either one of those quarterbacks. You don't have monetary commitments to either one of those quarterbacks. And you probably, I don't know how many players on that roster are really costing you that much money that you wouldn't be able to make things move around and open up some cap space and try and make a run at Dak. Just a possible. Now, it could be the biggest mistake of we're going to put two guys who like to dance in the middle and can't win playoff games and can't win down the road, put them together, or maybe it's perfect storm.
You could. I'm with you on that. I feel like it's more of the latter. I think that could be a dangerous combination. I'm all about, the Holy Trinity, right? You got to have the GM, the head coach, and the QB. I think the Steelers do a good job with their head coach and their GM right now. As you mentioned, the big issue is who's the quarterback to complete the Holy Trinity for them. They don't have that guy. Yeah. And Dak does fit. He fits Tomlin's, because Tom's a culture coach, and Dak's a culture guy, right? Dak's X-Man ability is really about him as a leader out there on the field, and his ability to kind of process in that new offense that he's in, his ability to process defenses, his ability to be able to manipulate defenders. Like, that's what Dak does really well, but that's all more mental. That's not, nobody's ever been like, oh man, Dak has this physically freakish tool.